stand. One thing that I did want to let you know, hey, who wants candy on Friday? Halloween candy. I will try to pick up some Halloween candy for you. Let's go ahead and go to that transcript. There we go. All right. So I am going to go ahead and pick up some candy for you. Couple of other things. I graded your exams. I am not giving them back yet because we have a couple of people who still are at least indicating that they want an opportunity to take it. So I thought for the most part, the exams were pretty good. We actually had somebody get 100, like not even joking. But I also did get a couple of people who were not doing as well as I probably would have hoped. So if that is you, and you're starting to get a little bit concerned, please remember we have 2 more exams. Additionally, we have the optional final. So if you missed the second exam, or if you didn't exactly do great on the second exam, do know that that optional final is available for you. Also, remember that we have a project due in a couple of weeks, and that project is going to give your grade a boost. So if you're not the best test taker, and I know that some of you are not, usually people who are not great test takers are pretty open about the fact that they are not good test takers. If that's you, this will give you a little bit of a boost. Also, remember that we do have quizzes, and I will start putting up practice quizzes. So I did put up practice quizzes for chapters 5, 6, and 7. I don't think anybody actually took them though. But honestly, if multiple choice is not your thing, go hit the practice tests when I put them up, because I pull the test questions from there too. So if you're not the best test taker, if you want to get some practice and expose yourself to test questions, go ahead and do that. Other friendly reminder, my other big friendly reminder to you, your quiz is due on Wednesday, not today, but Wednesday at 5 o'clock. I will also bring in a sample choose your own adventure book on Wednesday, so you can kind of see what I'm looking for. I have a lot of sample projects in my office, along with a lot of brains. Okay, so with all of that in mind, let us get back into the world of thinking and language. So the last time that we were here on Friday, we were talking about our good friend Steve. And our good friend Steve, who had personality traits that kind of fit with being a librarian. So I just want to kind of remind you, you don't need to write this down, but we have Steve. So Steve is very tidy. He has a passion for detail. He's helpful to people, but has little real interest in people or real world issues. When you ask most people whether Steve is more likely to be a librarian or a salesperson, now we were kind of 50-50 as a class. Many of you are critical thinkers and you go, we can't judge somebody's personality by their job. So half of the class said he was more likely to be a librarian. The other half of the class said he was more likely to be a salesperson. But the truth of the matter is that when you take this to participants and you do this in a research study, most people will pick that Steve is a librarian because he fits the profile of somebody who probably likes books more than they like people. Somebody who's a little bit reserved, very paying attention to detail, things that would require you to have a good working knowledge of the Dewey Decimal System and things like that. But the truth of the matter is that out in the real world, we probably have more salespeople than we have librarians. On the basis of sheer numbers, Steve is more likely to be a salesperson, not because of anything in his personality, but just because there are more salespeople out there. So this is what is known as the representativeness heuristic. So here's how it kind of works. In your mind, you have a pretty good idea of who you think a librarian is. You have a stereotype of who a librarian is or what a librarian looks like. And so you are going to judge the likelihood of whether or not somebody is a librarian based on how well that they fit that prototype that you've put in your mind. Now, the representativeness heuristic can be helpful for us. It can be helpful for us. I can't tell you how many people have come up to me during my time at Cotty and also before that and go, "You don't really strike me as being a professor type." And I'm like, yeah, I understand that. Because the idea is that professors tend to be a bit more introverted, a bit less like maybe not bouncing off the walls with energy. We can't blame the caffeine. I don't have any today. This is water. But the representativeness heuristic can also lead to errors, and it can lead to stereotypes. So for example, there's a really famous study. And I'm going to go ahead and put it in annotate for anybody who's interested in learning more about this study. It's a study by Brewer and Trayens from 1980. 198, before psychology was ever found. So Brewer and Trayens basically presented a bunch of students with a picture of a teaching assistant's office. And so this teaching assistant's office had a lot of different things that you would expect. So this was 1980. So I want to put into perspective that there's no computer in this office. There's a typewriter, there's a picnic basket, there's a skull. I'm assuming this is an anthropology professor's office or a teaching assistant's office. There's a bottle of wine, which was probably before most campuses became dry campuses. But here's what's interesting. So there's a desk, there's a typewriter, there's all the stuff that you would expect. But here's what's really interesting. There are no books in that office. And yet, when you ask people later on what they saw in that picture, they falsely recall seeing books when books were not actually present. So here's what's kind of going on. You already have an idea about what a prototypical professor's office looks like. You know how I know this? Many a student has come into my office and said, "You don't have a lot of books." No, I don't. Most of our work is done through journal articles. You can open up my filing cabinets and be horrified, but that's where most of my books are. They're in papers. But because we have an idea of what a professor or a teaching assistant's office should look like, we are likely to falsely recall something that fits with the stereotype, even though it wasn't present. So stereotyping and the representativeness heuristic can absolutely lead to some errors. Additionally, as I kind of mentioned, most people are going to underuse base rates. There are more salespeople than librarians out in the world. And because of that, it's probably more likely that Steve's a librarian. Here's another example that's kind of based on everyday life. Here in Vernon County, we have maybe about, I don't know if Cotty students factor into this or not, but about 1/3 of the county's population has been vaccinated. That leaves about 2/3 that have not. And so occasionally, if you go on the Facebook group, which I do not recommend, do not look at the comments, never look at the comments, but somebody goes, "I wonder who's getting sick. Is it the vaccinated people?" Actually, probably not. Not because of anything that the vaccine is doing or not doing, but simply because of base rates. If there are more people that are not vaccinated than vaccinated, more of the sick people, if we take a random sample, are likely to be unvaccinated. That's just base rates. And yeah, I would say try not to talk to people about stats. They do not understand. Anyway, that's another matter. Okay, so we've talked about the representativeness heuristic. Now we're going to talk about the availability heuristic. So the availability heuristic is when you estimate the likelihood of events occurring based on how readily you can bring an example to mind. Do you have an example that is readily available to you? If you do, you are going to be more likely to assume that it's more common than it actually is. So here's a really good example. Is there anybody here who's afraid of flying? Yeah, me too. Now, I'm going to pick on somebody. Natalie, why are you afraid of flying? Okay, you're afraid of heights. Okay, I think that's a legit reason. Ashley, why are you afraid of flying? Heights? Are you both afraid of crashing? Okay, so Natalie, when's the last time you got in a car? Okay, last month. So you've been in a car pretty readily. You don't get worried about getting into a car accident, do you? Maybe a little? Okay. Ooh, yeah, that'll do it. Ashley, do you get in a car pretty frequently? Now, you know your odds of being in a car accident are definitely a lot higher than being in a plane crash, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what's really interesting. People like me are afraid of flying because that turbulence hits and you're like, oh gosh, we're going to fall out of the sky. Humankind was not meant to be up this high in the air, you know. But the truth of the matter is you have a higher percentage of getting into a car accident than you ever do with being in a plane crash. But here's why we get worried. When a car crash happens, it typically does not make the news. You know why? Because it's common. Car crashes are pretty common. I've been in like 2. To be fair, one was a fender bender, so it doesn't really count. The other one was pretty rough. I was 18 and yeah, definitely didn't get behind the wheel of a car for a while. But car crashes are pretty common. It's why it's important to drive safely because odds are pretty good. If you haven't been in a car crash, you probably know somebody who has. And it's important to drive safely, wear seatbelts, take proper precautions, that whole thing. And try not to speed. Note that I said not speed, I said try, because I know it's hard to actually do that. But on the other hand, plane crashes are actually pretty rare. And because they're rare, when they happen, they are a huge deal. And because of that, when you're thinking about what's more common or more likely, car crashes are not, unless you've been in one yourself, you're not really going to bring up a lot of instances of car accidents. However, you could probably think of at least one plane crash that has happened within the past 10 years. Dr. Gilchrist has a really bad luck when it comes to this. Both times I've been on the international trip, the day that we're coming back, there's always a big high profile plane crash. So I went to Barcelona in 2015, and the day that we were leaving was the Germanwings crash, the plane that crashed in the Alps. And then 2019 I went, and that was when the Boeing Air Max for Ethiopian Air basically crashed. And those are the days that we're about to get on a plane. It's hard not to think about it a little bit. Also might be a sign that maybe I shouldn't go on the international trip. Nah, I like going to Spain too much. But the idea is that because we can bring those instances more easily to mind, we think they're more common than they actually are. So here's a more mundane example. You don't need to write this down. Just think about it. Is the letter K going to be more likely to occur in the first position of a word, or is it more likely to occur in the third position of a word? Okay, think about it for just a little bit. Who says first? Who says third? Ah, Dr. Gilchrist has been making you aware of tricks. That's good. It turns out that it's actually more likely in the third position. So words like joke, poke, joking, things like that. But you probably think more of words like kitchen, king, kangaroo. But it turns out that K is actually more likely to be in the third position, not the first. But because the ones that start with K come more easily to mind, you think it's more common than it actually is. So when we use heuristics, we tend to become overconfident. We have a tendency to overestimate the accuracy of our beliefs and our judgments. We are also likely to overestimate the extent of our talents. That's why so many people go onto American Idol thinking that they are good singers, and then it turns out that they're not. Now, part of the reason that this happens is because those people might be the best singers that they know. I am one of the better singers that I know, but that doesn't mean I'm good. You don't have enough knowledge to realize that you're probably not as good as you think you are. So here's kind of an example. How many of you, and I want you to raise your hand, how many of you think you are an above average driver? For those of you that drive. Staley, your hand just went right up. Now, what if I told you that most people think they're above average drivers? Now, statistically, how can that be possible? You can't have most people thinking they're above average when the average is the average. That's where most people are. That's why it's an average. But can I ask you a couple of questions? Why do you believe that you are an above average driver?
I don't know. I like driving, so I like make sure I'm watching everything.
Okay.
I'm not distracted.
Okay. Speeding tickets?
No.
Car accidents?
No.
Okay. And that's what most people will say. See, I never say I'm a good driver. I just say I'm getting better. Because I actually have been in a car accident, and a really bad one. And it was totally my fault too. I'll admit it, which you're not supposed to do. Like, I think I came out of the car, and to be fair, I was a senior in high school, and I went out going, it's my fault. Hindsight 2020, you're not supposed to do that. But I was like, oh my gosh, it was my fault. I was very naive. Anyway, most people think they are above average drivers because exactly that. They've never had a speeding ticket. They've never been in a car accident. But here's the thing. Do you know bad drivers who have miraculously never gotten a speeding ticket despite the fact they speed? I watch people get away with stuff all the time. And you better believe when I see somebody screaming down the highway, I'm like, where's a police officer to give them a ticket? Honestly, it's probably not worth stressing over. As long as they're not hurting anybody, they can get out of my way and I will let them go and pass me. It's fine. But most of us don't get good feedback. It's part of the reason why I'm really encouraging you, if you haven't really done as well as you were hoping on the last two exams, to try the practice tests. It will give you a pretty good idea of how much you know and how much you don't. It can help you identify where your strong points are, the areas that you know really well in a chapter, and the areas that might be weaker. Most of us become overconfident because we don't get good feedback. So Staley, you remember your driver's test? You had a highway patrol person sitting next to you in the car scoring your every move. And for example, I remember I did one when I was 26 to get my driver's license, and I'm like wobbling back and forth while I'm backing up. They took points off because I didn't go straight enough. Like, they are hardcore on scoring. So do you think you'd have a better assessment of your driving abilities if a highway patrol officer were basically scoring your every move? Maybe a little bit? Yeah. So that's the thing. We don't always get good feedback, and feedback helps us figure out where we need to work on things. So here's something that's kind of interesting relating to overconfidence. Surgeons tend to be a bit more overconfident and less accurate in their judgments than meteorologists. And I know you're surprised by this. Let's talk about it. So, how many of you were kind of freaking out about the scary weather yesterday? I sure was. I actually hid in my basement for about 2 hours grading your exams because that was a safer place to be than the top floor of my house where I could see all the trees waving around. So here's the thing though, a meteorologist forecasts the weather for a given day based on a particular weather model. And if it turns out that they're off for the day, if they're not quite right, they have an opportunity to get immediate feedback. Their model was either good and it predicted the weather, or it was bad and it didn't, and they can make modifications accordingly. On the other hand, when you're a surgeon, you don't get immediate feedback on whether or not your surgery was effective. And additionally, you can do everything right, and you can still end up with somebody basically passing on your table, even though you did everything right. You don't necessarily get very good feedback because the person can't be like awake and going, oh, you're cutting out my tumor. I feel better already. That's horrifying. So you generally don't get immediate feedback as a surgeon the way that you do as a meteorologist. And that's why, despite the fact that you think the meteorologist lies to you, they're actually much more accurate in their judgments. Like the meteorologist that I like, Doug Hetty down in Joplin, was actually saying yesterday, it's going to be a little bit more east and we're not going to really get a lot of bad weather. And it turned out to be true. It was kind of nice, but I still hid in the basement anyway because of that what if factor. Okay, so one of the things that we find when it comes to judgments and decision making is that they can be modified based on how they are framed. So the way that you word something matters. Can I ask somebody a question? Who here drinks like milk? Like actual animal milk? I drink like almond milk and oat milk is amazing. Okay, Mariah, what kind of milk do you drink? You drink vitamin D, okay. Does anybody here drink 1% or 2% or skim milk? I used to drink skim milk. Okay, so here's what's interesting. For those of you that drink 1% or 2% milk, why do you drink 1 or 2? Why don't you drink vitamin D or whole milk? Okay. In my family, we were a 2% family. Do you know why we drank 2% milk? Because it was less fat than vitamin D milk. But here's the thing, the 1% and the 2% come from the percentage of milk fat in the milk. So when you hear 1% versus 2% versus whole milk, you're like, ooh, that's not good. Like 1% or 2% is better. To put this into perspective, whole milk only has like 3 to 4% milk fat. It's not that much of a difference, but people really prefer 1 or 2% because it sounds healthier. It's not all that different. It's really not all that different. So framing matters. We think that 1% or 2% is a massive drop off in fat from whole. It's really only about 2 or 3% tops. Here's another way that we do this. What's the best way to market ground beef? 25% fat or 75% lean? You're gonna get the 75%. Sounds healthier. Exact same fat content. Can you think of any other examples where framing is used like this? I mean, sales kind of work like this, don't they? You're like, oh, you saved this much money. No, you're still spending money. You're like, I saved $20. True, it was $20 more last week, but you're not actually saving anything. But when you tell somebody it's on sale, you're going to be more likely to buy it. Kohl's does this so well. They will tell you on the tag what the suggested retail price is. They put it, I feel like they mark it up on purpose. So you're like, this is supposed to be $60, but I'm only getting it for $40. What a deal. You're still spending money. I'm not saying don't shop. Okay. So one other thing I will mention when it comes to the judgments that we have and the decisions that we make is that oftentimes we are going to cling to beliefs that we have even when there is evidence to the contrary. I'm sure you are seeing this in a variety of different ways. So I'm not going to talk about any real world examples. I'm sure you can find those for yourself. What we tend to do is that when we are presented with contrary evidence to what we believe, this is what is called belief perseverance or belief perseverance, depending on how you pronounce it. We're going to try to discount any evidence that goes against what we already believe. So here's what's kind of interesting. We have a tendency to mark what we believe and then look for evidence that supports it after the fact. That is what we all do. And when we are presented with evidence that goes against it, we're going to say, oh, that evidence is biased. Okay, anybody need some more time? Okay, thanks, Ashley. Did everybody have a good time at GP? I'm a wuss. That's what I'm going to say. I'm a wuss. But my favorite part was Dr. Roy in the judging. And it was like, Dr. Roy, I'm scared. She just grabs my hand. And I'm like, I thought I was the one who was wimpy. No, I did very much like the touching the gross things. And I loved that they turned my psych lab into a circus. I got attacked at the ankle by a lion. It was great. Okay, so our current beliefs are going to affect our evaluation of evidence that is related to those beliefs. So back in 1987, Kunda presented both male and female participants with an article that basically found a causal link between caffeine and breast cancer. Yikes. Somebody who drinks coffee here, that is not a good thing. So they looked at people who were male and female participants and also low and high caffeine consumers. So how do you think different groups of people are going to evaluate this article? Does anybody have any thoughts here? So who's going to be okay with this article? Who's going to be like, yeah, that makes sense. That works for me. Probably somebody who's a low consumer, right? I mean, this doesn't personally affect them. Like they're already low consumers of caffeine, so they'll feel pretty good about their choice. Do you think there's going to be a gender breakdown here? Okay, so in what sort of way? Yeah.
Breast cancer is usually marketed as something that is for women or people with like presenting breasts, but men can also get breast cancer, but they should always know that.
It's less common, but it's more deadly because of that, because you generally don't expect people who present as male to get breast cancer. But yes, they have breasts too. They're just flatter. But so maybe we don't really expect our male participants to have any problems with this article. But I think we need to keep an eye out for our female participants who are high caffeine consumers, such as myself. Because if this article is true, you're going to have to change your beliefs. You're going to have to modify your behavior. And folks, there are a lot of things that we would rather do than change. Change has to come from within. Most of the time, if you hear an article that is telling you that one of your beliefs or one of your habits needs to change, it's probably not going to do that much for you. So what we tend to find is that our male participants evaluated the article similarly. For our female participants, low caffeine consumers basically evaluated the article and said that it looked pretty accurate. High caffeine consumers that were female were actually much more skeptical about it because, again, that would require them to change their mind. That would require them to change their behavior. And oftentimes, we don't want to change. And because we don't want to change, we're going to go, that article's biased. It was done on a really small sample of people. We shouldn't listen to that. So oftentimes we're going to find that when we are presented with evidence that goes against what we believe, we are probably going to discount that so that we can maintain our beliefs. Because our beliefs are generally not always, our beliefs come about from a variety of different things, but very few of us, and I think this is changing. I think it's important to engage in critical thinking and critically examine why you have the beliefs that you do. But oftentimes for your average person, they form the beliefs first, and then they get the evidence to support what they think. It is okay, and it is encouraged, at least in my class and in this space, it is encouraged to change your mind if you have good evidence to support doing so. You know, it's okay to change your mind and admit that you were wrong about something. It really is. Okay, we're going to move on to talk about language. So when we talk about language, we often tend to mostly focus on the spoken or the written aspects of language, but really, language comes in a variety of different things. Not only do we have our spoken language and our written language, we have signs, we have gestures, and facial expressions that help communicate not only to ourselves, but to other people around us. Language is incredibly important because it allows us to express our internal states to ourselves and other people. And what's more, it allows us to spread ideas and information. So one of the things that's really interesting, if anybody's taken one of Dr. Quick's anthropology classes, once we as a species learned language, culture and the transmission of culture spread rapidly. Intellectually, our capabilities grew once we were capable of sharing ideas and communicating them with other people. But yeah, it doesn't just have to be spoken or written. For example, if I do this when it's raining outside, you probably know I'm annoyed. If I give you this and I'm not being sarcastic about it, you know you did a good job. So language is not just about what we speak and what we write, it is our facial expressions. It's the way that we talk with our hands, which we absolutely do. And if you do something like American Sign Language or another sign language, you are literally talking with your hands. Everybody good? Okay. So here's something kind of interesting. Oh, wow, that's weird. Wait, okay, there, it's like, it's off and it's bugging me. One of the things that you need to know is that once you learn your first words, you develop language incredibly rapidly. Now, one thing that I will mention, your comprehension develops well before your ability to produce. Comprehension does not require things like motor movements or moving your teeth or your tongue or your jaw. So your comprehensive abilities are often going to come before your actual production. So we have a term for this, and unfortunately Zoom froze up, so I cannot annotate. The term that we use, so hopefully if you're watching this on the recording, you can see this. The term that we use for comprehension is receptive language. So we're in the process of receiving. And then when we actually are able to speak, that is what is referred to as productive language. So here's what's interesting. Even in infancy, our receptive language is much, much better than our productive language. Our receptive language develops first. Our productive language basically pops up when we say our first actual words. But our receptive language has been going on much longer than that. So children learn their native languages very early on. We start learning it within the first few months of life, and within the span of a year after being born, many of us are already producing our very first words. Generally, from childhood on, once you've learned your first word, you actually learn about 3,500 words per year. And it's actually estimated that by the time you graduate high school or secondary school, you actually have learned 60,000 different words. And we're not just talking about those words you do for the SATs. Oh, I got a million of them. I had to learn them for AP English. I know the difference between a metonymy and a synecdoche. It has no idea what I mean there. Bless the auto transcription. It finds a way to embarrass me at every opportunity. Okay. So here are the basic steps of language development. Now, when we talked about child development, one of the big things that I mentioned is that we all go through the same stages, but we don't necessarily hit those stages at the exact same time. And this is also true. So notice that when this is supposed to happen, it's approximate. Everybody's going to have some variability, and that's okay. But you're going to have to babble before you actually produce actual words. That's just how it is. So at about 4 months of age, that's when we start to see babbling, and that's when receptive language is really beginning to develop, when people start to babble. So really early on, infants will just repeat a sound over and over again. So they'll go ba 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 ba, ma 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 ma. They'll repeat a sound over and over. My oldest niece, who went to her sophomore homecoming dance, that makes me feel so old. She actually, one of my favorite things to do when she was a couple of months old, I'd go ah, and she'd go ah, and just repeat that syllable. So here's what's interesting. By about 10 months of age, infants are still babbling, but they're doing so in a really interesting way. So instead of repeating the same sound over and over again, they actually start combining the sounds as if they are actual words, and they actually say them with a sentence-like intonation. So you may not understand what they're saying, but they're trying to sound like the adults in their life. So whereas early babbling is ba, 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 I'm going to do this. Babbling at the 10-month mark looks like ba, ma, 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 ga, ga. So they're actually trying to talk to you. They're actually trying to communicate with you. And they're combining these different sounds to make what they believe are words. They, of course, are not words. They are gibberish. But that indicates that the infant is learning to combine things. And then by about an infant's first birthday, at about 12 months of age, most infants produce their very first word. Does anybody know what their first word was? Mine was apparently bye-bye. Yeah, Mariah. Dada? How many of you were dada or mama? Most of them are probably going to be syllables that are repeated. So it kind of sounds like babbling. So there's always this question of, are they actually saying a word, or am I the adult just imagining that they're saying a word? So there is this kind of theoretical discussion about whether or not they're actual words, because like ba-ba, that could be bottle, that could be bye-bye, that could be baby. It could be a lot of different things. But no matter what, whether they're real words or imagined, what we know is that at that point, language really starts to develop. And by about 2 years of age, we actually get to a 2-word stage. Yeah, Chloe.
So my older sister works in like early childcare. And one of the things they do is they teach sign language, like baby sign, which is like a different thing. So I was wondering, because I know my young niece was able to like sign like water and more and hungry, really young, but she wasn't talking yet. So I was wondering if these are like similar time frames.
They actually are. So if you start, so oftentimes when a child is born with language like speech impediments or hearing impediments, they will often, or if they're born to deaf parents, which can also happen, you're going to see a lot of signing very early on. And at least if infants are signing really early on, they do actually follow these stages as well. They babble using sign language. Now, I don't exactly know what that would look like because I've never signed very much. I was in sign language club in 6th grade, and my conquering achievement was ordering a pizza at Pizza Hut that was barbecue. And that's it. I didn't know barbecue, so I had to go BBQ. Yeah. That's the best that I've got. But yeah, from what I've heard from other people who do a lot of work with speech development, it looks really similar with sign language. So by about 24 months of age, we actually get to the 2-word telegraphic stage. So here's why we call it telegraphic speech, because it sounds like somebody sending you a telegram. So there are no major function words, or all it is just content words, basic nouns and verbs. So want ball, kitty here, cookie time. Actually, every time it's cookie time. Okay. So we get this telegraphic speech, but here's what's interesting. So after our 2 stages of babbling, we have a 1-word stage, then we have a 2-word stage, but we don't have a 3 or a 4-word stage. Once you've gotten to the 2-word stage, language develops really rapidly, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, 2.5- and 3-year-olds are speaking complete sentences, and they're sounding like little adults. And it is amazing to just see how quickly that develops. So at that point, they are capable of speaking complete sentences in a variety of different lengths. So we all go through these stages. We may hit these stages at different points, but this is the overall sequence. And here's what's remarkable. This is not just reserved for English. This happens with every language on earth. This is how every person on earth learns a native language. Now, one thing I will mention, if you are in a bilingual household or a trilingual household, so for example, my half sister had my father speaking English to her and her mother speaking German to her. When you're getting that bilingual background, this is going to proceed more slowly, but you're still going to do it for both of them. She's actually trilingual because she spent a lot of time. First of all, she majored in French in addition to art history. But also, she spent a lot of time over in Europe where they actually encourage learning foreign languages at an early age versus 12 or 13 here. And so because of that, she actually knows English, German, and French. I asked her once how she tends to think. So when I think to myself, I think in English. She said that she actually shifts. That she'll start thinking in English, but it'll shift to German, and sometimes it'll shift to French. But she can understand all of it because she understands all of them. And I was thinking about applying for the Vienna trip, and she said she would help me with my German. I know a little bit because I did spend some time in Germany, but also I was 4 and I was only there for a year. So I can count to 12 and I can say a curse word that I picked up from my father. Okay, so I was kind of mentioning that these stages of development happen for all languages. Part of the reason for this is because we are born with what Noam Chomsky referred to as a universal grammar. So Noam Chomsky, you may know him best as a political scientist, but he actually got his start as a linguist. I actually know more of his work on language than I do his work on political science by virtue of being a cognitive psychologist. But he basically proposed this idea that you and I come into the world with a built-in readiness to learn any language on Earth. And then the environment will help shape the language that you learn. So you come built into the world capable and ready to learn any language. And then the environment shapes you to basically make you an expert in your native language. But there's a trade-off. As you become more proficient in your native language, this system is designed to make you an expert in your native language. It means that it's going to become harder for you to learn other languages. So here's a really good example. So in the Japanese language, there is no distinction between R and L. They are treated as exactly the same or interchangeable. Now in English, we have a distinction. R is different from L. They are not the same, they are not interchangeable. So here's what's interesting. Japanese newborns can actually distinguish the difference between R and L at birth. They can tell the difference, but over time, as they get exposed to their language, they lose that ability. You and I, when we're born, we can actually notice distinctions between T's that are critical for the Hindi language. But as we get better at learning our native language, we lose that distinctive ability. We're not going to be able to distinguish between different types of T's. They all sound like tuh. So it's kind of critical then that if you want to learn another language, it stands to reason you need to learn it early. Additionally, if you want to learn any language on Earth, even your native language, you need to be exposed to it in your environment. The negative side of this is that by the age of 7, if we have not learned a language, it's usually pretty well understood that we're never going to be able to speak any language proficiently. So exposure is critical. So we'll talk about language and intelligence next time. We're going to talk about IQ tests and why they're weird and wrong, etc. Have a wonderful day. I will see you all on Wednesday.